He is the greatest photographer of the 20th century. He is like Tolstoy was to literature. He covered all the ground in a vast way, politically, socially, and the most personal and complex insight into the human personality. He was everywhere that marked the movement of the 20th century. I'm in awe of him. I'm absolutely in awe of him. Everybody's a Cartier-Bresson baby. They all have taken from him. I mean, the pictures go beyond any breaking down of what a picture is supposed to be or any intellectualizing about it. When you hear Bach, you know you're in the right place. And to have lived in the time of Cartier-Bresson is something in itself.
Hello there. In this video, I'm going to skip over the fact that Henri Cartier-Bresson was probably the most remarkable photojournalist of all time. He was a dedicated humanist with a mastery of anticipation and timing. He never had to use a light meter because he could intuitively gauge light levels, and he instinctively framed his pictures geometrically. He could shoot the golden section without bothering to check. It's no wonder that Robert Capa insisted on including him as one of the original 4 Magnum Photos members. I'll also ignore the fact that his work has directly or indirectly influenced almost all the great photographers that have followed him, including Robert Frank and Alex Webb. So you might ask, what am I going to be talking about? Well, it's in the title. I find that one of the most interesting things about his work is that one seldom feels his presence within his pictures. He believed the photographer shouldn't dominate reality, but dissolve into it. So he would move through the world lightly, photographing quickly and silently with his small Leica. He's such a giant within photography's chronology because of his creative versatility and the sheer volume of his output. Trying to evaluate his work objectively is a challenge because so many of his images have become icons. For this video, I've chosen pictures that haven't been burnt into my subconscious, those that I can still effortlessly respond to because of their vitality or strangeness. This pair of pictures taken in Spain emphasizes 2 aspects of his work that I'm concentrating on in this session: his ability to remove himself from the drama, and his search for the otherworldly. In this video, I'll try to reveal how these are strongly tied. Before photography and particularly photojournalism became central to his life, he moved in Surrealist circles in Paris, and this influence never left him. He once said, "Surrealism has had a profound effect on me, and all my life I've done my utmost never to betray it." Many of his pictures are less about timing than about strange visual coincidences or dreamlike spatial relationships. These photographs are not straightforward documents of life. They are little disruptions in reality. The Surrealists believe that modern life contains hidden poetry and irrational connections, and that these moments can only emerge if one is actively receptive to them in an almost unconscious manner. Cartier-Bresson's desire to vanish from a scene was both practical and philosophical. Practically, invisibility allowed life to continue naturally in front of his camera. He hated using flash because it announced the photographer's presence and shattered spontaneity. And he would also tape over shiny metal parts of his camera to make it less conspicuous. Philosophically, vanishing was part of his broader surrealist practice. The less the photographer inserts their ego, the more the world is able to respond in its own strange language. This is a very different approach from street photographers like Garry Winogrand, or even more so Bruce Gilden. You can almost feel their nervous confrontational energy ricocheting off the world. With someone like Diane Arbus, each encounter became psychologically charged through her presence and the intense interactions that she created. Cartier-Bresson also distrusted any form of theatricality or attempts to merge oneself with the subject. This is in sharp contrast to later photographers like Robert Mapplethorpe or Nan Goldin, where personality and presence became central to the work. Mapplethorpe imposed himself through his controlled stylization, while Goldin made her presence and the camera an essential part of the experience. Perhaps Cartier-Bresson could see where things were heading because around the time these photographers were emerging in the 70s, he resigned from Magnum. But I don't want to rush to the end of the story, so I'll backtrack. Cartier-Bresson's desire for photographic invisibility seems deeply connected to his temperament and the contradictions in his personality. He was intensely private, and even when he became famous, he resisted attempts to turn him into a public intellectual or celebrity artist. His quiet sensitivity was connected to the emotional tone of his work. He used photography partly to avoid self-exposure, as much as an instrument of discovery. He had originally studied painting and saw himself becoming an artist or academic. He had an experience that he said was similar to being struck by a thunderbolt.
The only thing which completely was an amazement for me and brought me to photography is the work of Munkachi. When I saw the photograph of Munkachi of the black kids running in a wave, I couldn't believe that such a thing could be caught with a camera. And when I saw that, I said, damn it. I took my camera and I went out in the street.
He said, I suddenly understood that a photograph could fix eternity in an instant. His core realization was that the camera had the capacity to capture the immediacy, movement, and spontaneity that he had been searching for in art. His involvement with filmmaker Jean Renoir was enormously influential. Working as his assistant sharpened his understanding of aspects like movement, gesture, and sequencing within image making. The arrival of the small Leica camera fundamentally changed his approach. It suited his personality perfectly, allowing him to respond instinctively while remaining unobtrusive. This technical freedom helped him advance his philosophy of disappearing while photographing. He made a few revealing remarks. One must approach the subject on tiptoe. You have to be like a cat. And probably most revealing, one needs to forget about oneself.
Sensitivity, it's intuition and sensitivity, and not wanting. Mustn't want. Receptive.
I always have my camera, except for shaving in the morning. It's an extension of the eye. Photography is very much to me a physical pleasure, like hunting, except that we don't kill.
Even up until the late 40s, he still had serious doubts about becoming a full-time photographer. He felt the requirements for editorial work would clash with his surrealist aesthetic.
In my early paintings, I was impressed by the attitudes of the surrealist. The role of subconscious and the revolt against the bourgeois conceptualists.
It was Robert Capa who convinced him that full-time photojournalism might actually suit his temperament. He appealed to Cartier-Bresson's anti-colonialist sentiments and his love of travel and adventure. He argued that nothing in the craft of reportage could actually corrupt his surrealist soul if he refused to let it do so. He also warned him about pigeonholing himself into just a surrealist photographer, because he would be at risk of becoming precious and eventually lost. The surrealists insist on dream-inspired creativity. Unlike art forms like poetry and music, photographers have to be fully awake and cannot float through the creative process. Cartier-Bresson understood this dilemma and realized that the camera can only access the surreal through the strangeness of life, or what the surrealists call the marvelous. He relied on two surrealist techniques: the juxtaposition of objects that do not rationally belong together, and his ability to find something that was removed from its everyday context. Because these moments are rare, Cartier-Bresson decided to hitch his desire to take photographs of the marvelous to the profession of reportage. So, in a way, he backed hesitantly into photojournalism. Throughout his journalistic career, he largely maintained a level of invisibility. He wasn't interested in directing people, choosing rather to observe and patiently waiting for the perfect moment. His subject choices reflect the reserved aspect of his nature that avoided the limelight. Even during the great historical moments, India after Gandhi's assassination, post-war Europe, or communist China, he was drawn to peripheral scenes and the pauses between events. He was recording history through his experience of ordinary lives, rather than trying to highlight a spectacle. He also didn't try to spell out everything for his audience by presenting linear stories. Rather, he aimed for ambiguity, visual irony, symbolic tension, and unresolved gestures. Paradoxically, though, in his attempt to remain hidden, he created a unique signature in his work. His return to drawing was his final act of vanishing from the frame. Through the 1970s, he took fewer and fewer photographs and embraced the meditative aspects of drawing. This decision wasn't simply a retirement, it felt more philosophical, as though he had become uneasy with what photography itself had become. He said, "People are thinking too much about techniques and not enough about seeing." In keeping with his understated character, he never trashed photography publicly, but he made it clear that drawing had become everything to him. Thanks for staying with me. Please join me next time. Cheers.
I had assignments to take portraits of famous people, and for me, famous and not famous comes to the same. It's another human being. But you have to concentrate, and you can't talk and concentrate at the same time. There's nothing to say, what can I tell you?